Sha'Ul and the Greek philosophers. In our last episode, we looked where we left Sha'Ul travelling down the eastern coast of Macedonia towards Athens, while Sila and Timothy stayed on at Berea. In verse 15, Luke says, Sha'ul's escort went with him as far as Athens, then left and instructed Sila and Timothy to come as quickly as they could. While not actually stated, it appears that Luke may well have been the escort of Sha'ul on his journey down the coast to Athens and then returned to Berea. There is no further suggestion that Sha'ul had any personal supporter with him in Athens, because when he arrived, Luke said he went straight to the synagogues in Athens and began discussing with the unbelieving Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles all about Yeshua. During the weekdays, he spent time in the marketplace, speaking with anybody who would listen. It is important that he appears to have been totally alone at that time that he was in Athens, as we will see later. The spirit within Sha'ul was deeply disturbed at seeing the city full of idols. This was the first time in his life that Sha'ul had actually been exposed to the stark reality of the world of Hellenism. He had finally come face to face with the polytheistic world that had so drastically influenced his people of Yehuda, both in Eretz Israel and in the diaspora. He doubtless would have reflected deeply on the impact the Seleucid Empire had had on his own people. He was standing in the capital of the culture that had inflicted constant pain on his own people, both physical and spiritual, between the time of the conquest by Alexander the Great in 333 BCE, right down till the time of the rise of Herod the Great in 37 BCE. Even though by the first century the Romans were the political superpower, the people of Athens and the surrounding regions of Macedonia and Anatolia were still religiously and culturally bound into the Hellenistic ways of the former Greek Empire. In Athens, Sha'ul was being confronted with a full display of practice of ancient polytheism. Greek Hellenism from classical times had a pantheon of 12 Olympic deities that were headed by Zeus. Each of the Hellenistic gods were honored by temples and stone statues and street shrines, all dedicated to each of the specific deities. Each city-state throughout the region conducted festivals and rituals at various specific times during the year, with particular emphasis directed towards their patron god for each city. In Athens, the patron god was Athena, while neighboring Corinth had as their patron Apollo. There were statues commemorating each different god, both in their temples and in the open spaces. The presence of all these statues and temples to each of the different gods must have been totally overwhelming to Sha'ul, a Parish or Pharisee, and a devout believer in Yeshua and Yahweh as being the only God. Being confronted with so many different deities that he had to call upon the support of the Ruach HaKodesh to enable him to confront the polytheistic-minded people of Athens. Sha'ul was reminded by the Ruach of how he had been called by Yeshua on the road to Damascus, and how, again, just earlier in this same journey, he had been reminded that Yeshua was calling him to be the emissary, primarily to the Goyim, or the nations, which is why he found himself in Athens. So, finding himself in Athens, the capital of Hellenistic Goyim, he understood what lay ahead of him. So turning to Acts 17, verse 18 to 21, Luke shares how Shaul started a meeting with the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. That must have been an out-of-world experience for Shaul, because the leading advocates of those two Hellenistic philosophies were trying to convince Shaul to see their worldview as being correct. Yet Shaul kept on sharing the truth about Yahweh from the words of Torah. Hearing Torah for possibly the first time to the Athenians, it sounded like a pagan propagandist bringing yet another foreign god into their midst. They were completely baffled by what Shaul was saying about Yahweh and Yeshua. Totally perplexed, they finally took him before the High Council to seek advice as to how they should interpret the words of Shaul. Even though they did not understand the significance of his words, what they were hearing somehow resonated internally with many of them. Because in verse 19 through 20 it says, "May we know what this new teaching is all about that you are presenting. Some of these things we are hearing from you strike us as strange, and we would like to know more about what it all means." They did not realize the significance of what they are hearing from Shaul. But after having ridiculed him as being a babbler, they began to realize that he was sharing things they needed to hear. Then, in verse 21, we have yet another example of Luke using hyperbole when he says all the Athenians and the foreigners living there used to spend their spare time talking and hearing about the latest intellectual fads. Certainly, in the city the size and diversity of Athens, not all the people would have been gathering regularly to discuss philosophy. However, religious matters were the core issues between the Epicureans and the Stoics. Also, they had regular academic debates which took place in the central venue of the Areopagus, which was a rocky hill in the centre of Athens. It's located near the Acropolis and was known to the Romans as Mars Hill. Now I want to take a few minutes to consider briefly the type of subject that would have been debated before that High Council of Athens. The two most significant questions that were debated by the Epicureans and the Stoics were, do gods exist? And if they do, what is their nature? Do gods intervene in the lives of men? Looking at it from the Epicurean perspective, they denied the existence of a purposeful God and believed that the universe originated by a chance form of rain falling as atoms. They mocked the popular pagan gods and the mythologies as nothing more than elemental spirits. Their view was that humans were merely material and dissolved and dissipated at death. They had no concept of the possibility of life beyond death. Thus, their aim in life was self-gratification, excluding the pursuits of higher or external moral and spiritual principles. Each self-gratification could either be gross and sordid or ascetic and refined, depending on how the person was inclined. Today's understanding of what constitutes an Epicurean lifestyle usually involves having desire for refined luxury, comfort, and fine food and drink. However, the modern definition differs significantly from the original ancient Greek philosophy. Basically, their whole approach to life was atheistic and self-centered. The Stoics, by contrast, were pantheists, for whom God was a mere word standing for some vague spirit in the universe. They understood the soul had a physical form which at death somehow absorbed into this blur of gods. The Stoic moral code was in some ways higher than that of the Epicureans, but for them the highest moral expression was to have an austere absence of emotion, and suppressing of passions was regarded as a superior attribute. So their primary approach to life was austerity and unemotional self-control. Those were the two expressions of the Hellenistic philosophy with which Sha'ul was being confronted. By contrast, he presented his own expression of how the world should be viewed from a Hebraic background, and his deep knowledge of the Tanakh, which he brought forward and expressed through his faith and trust in Yeshua and the Ruach HaKodesh. So being called upon to give a defense for his belief, in verse 22, he opens his discourse with the words that may appear rather condescending, where he said, "Men of Athens, I see how very religious you are in every way." Then he drew attention to how they were, when he was walking around the city, he'd observed many different temples, shrines, and places of dedication to their pantheon of deities. But among them was an altar inscribed to the unknown God. So he asked, "Why are you worshipping at such an altar?" They appeared ignorant as to the reason why. But a backstory from Greek legend suggests that around 600 BCE, the people of Athens had been delivered from an unexplained plague. So in honor of the God behind the cure, they erected an altar for future generations to give thanks. As time passed, the name of that God was lost, and the altar was dedicated to the unknown God, who had released their city from a plague. Sha'ul responded by saying, "This is the same God that I am proclaiming to you." There is no way that Sha'ul would have known the origin of the altar was related to worship of Yahweh Elohim, the God of the whole universe, unless the Ruach had actually made that truth known to him. His remark about the altar must have captured the attention of the hearers, because he then launched into further remarks about the God of the universe. As he goes on in verses 24 and 25, the God who made the universe and made everything in it, and who is the master of heaven and earth, does not live in man-made temples, nor is he served by human hands, as if lacking something, since it was he himself who gave life, breath, and everything in everyone. Luke then shows that Sha'ul drew them further into the work of the creation and how it was necessary for all mankind to seek after that one universal God. He continued on by sharing the attributes of Yahweh Elohim, but without revealing the name of Yahweh, because without being called by Yeshua, no Greek of any philosophical persuasion was entitled to know Yahweh by name. Use of his name was exclusively for the people of Israel to speak. Then, in verse 26 through 29, his words must have caused a great stirring among the Epicureans and the Stoics, because he hit them with the most powerful statement that could only have come directly from the Ruach HaKodesh, because in verses 30 through 31 he said, "In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he is commanding all people everywhere to turn to him from their sins. For he has set a day when he will judge the inhabited world, and to do it justly, by means of a man who he has designated. and he has given public proof of that by resurrecting this man from the dead. The mention of a dead person having been resurrected was too much for the audience to accept. As Luke says, the gathering was divided. Some scoffed, most likely they were the Epicureans, who, as we saw earlier, held to the belief that the soul was merely material and dissolved and dissipated at death. They could not abide the idea of life after death. In the same way, the Zadducees or Sadducees in Israel held to that same belief that there was no life after death, which may well have originated from their association with the Epicurean Greeks, who would have brought many strange beliefs into Israel during the Seleucid era. By contrast, Luke says the others wanted to hear more from Shaul. Among them was Dionysius, who may well have been the leader of the High Council. He appears to have been a judge in the Athenian court. So returning to verse 30, Shaul said, "In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he is commanding all people everywhere to turn from their sins." Those are perhaps the most significant words that Shaul said in his whole career as the 12th emissary of Yeshua. With those words, Shaul put the whole world on notice. By expressing those words before the High Council in the capital of the Hellenistic world, he was bringing forth the words of Yeshua, who had told his 12 emissaries in Matthew chapter 24, verses 34 to 35, "I tell you that this people will certainly not pass away before all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." Before the full 7,000 years of human history has ended, Yeshua will have completed fully all the words he spoke. But what Shaul was doing was setting the whole world on notice that the march towards the end had begun, even though Shaul did not know that 70 CE would bring an end to the scriptural narrative, and Yahweh's people, Israel, would be dispersed yet again. Only the book of Revelation would follow 25 years after the destruction of the temple, so that what Shaul was revealing to the Athenian High Council could be known throughout the period that would follow until all things were shown to have come to fulfillment through the return of Yeshua. Those words resulted from what he had witnessed in the city before he appeared before the council. Luke said in verse 16, Shaul's spirit within him had been disturbed at the sight of a city full of idols. And returning to verse 30, his concluding words were directed straight at the heart of Hellenism when he said, "Now he, Yeshua, is commanding all people everywhere to turn from their sins." Those words were directed straight at the world of the Goyim. That message was a warning, not just for the people of Athens, but to the whole world. Yet the message has been totally ignored by Christendom, which was birthed in the Hellenistic regions where Shaul had actually been teaching. That is why Yeshua sent Shaul out on his mission, his emissary mission, to the Goyim. After all, of the 12 emissaries Yeshua had chosen, only Shaul was adequately qualified to confront the Goyim in the very center of the Hellenistic world. Throughout the 1900 years that Israel was sprinkled among the Hellenistic nations of the Roman diaspora, none of the nations acknowledged the words of Shaul, the words that he had spoken so boldly in Athens. Now, in the 21st century, Christendom is in all its current forms, is in rapid decline. Through the last 38 Yuvels or Jubilees, or 1900 years, Vatican City, as the head of the Romanistic Hellenistic religion, has remained a city full of idols, just as it was in Athens when Shaul visited. So the Vatican has never embraced those words that Shaul spoke to Athenians. Instead, they have embraced a bizarre mix of Epicurean luxury offset by austere Stoicism, overlaid with celibacy. All that has happened within Vatican City while the people of the church generally remained poor. Just as verse 31 says, "For he has set a day when he will judge the inhabited world and do it justly by means of a man whom he has designated." Now that is Yahweh speaking there. The man whom Yahweh designated, of course, is Yeshua, the one whom the whole world of Christendom renamed as Jesus Christ. That name conceals the Hebraic nature of the message Sha'ul was presenting to the Athenian High Council. When we turn to the 2nd chapter of Daniel, Yeshua is the one who will strike the statue in Daniel chapter 2, verse 45. As Daniel said when revealing the king's dream, "The stone you saw, which without human hands separated itself from the mountain and broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great king, the great God, has revealed to the king what will occur in the future." That dream is true and its interpretation is reliable. So what Sha'ul said to the High Council in Athens in the latter part of the 1st century applied to all the nations of the world, both then and now. Therefore, those same words will be brought to completion sometime in this 21st century. So in conclusion, Shaul's time alone in Athens was a turning point in history for all nations of the world. Rather than continuing his second journey through Anatolia, as he had planned, he, under the direct instructions of the Ruach HaKodesh, ended up in Athens, the capital of the world of Hellenism, so that he could put all the nations on notice by fulfilling the words of Yeshua, as spoken in Matthew 24, verses 34-35. "I tell you that this people will certainly not pass away before all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." Guided by the Ruach, he wandered the streets, observing just how far the people of Athens had strayed from the knowledge of their Creator. And he learned just how little even the leaders of the community knew about their own history. Under the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, Sha'ul was given the power to put all the nations of the world on notice that the Creator of the universe had reached the point where he, Yahweh Elohim, was pronouncing the future for all mankind. There could be no doubt in the mind of Sha'ul's audience and the rest of humanity, both then and in subsequent generations, that Yeshua will, on the day yet to be revealed, bring an end to this whole civilization, just as he did through the flood in the days of Noah. We would do well to heed the message, because we are now, at this very time, in a day, near the day which is yet to be revealed, as Yeshua said in Matthew 24, 37-39, regarding that day. "The Son of Man's coming will be just like it was in the days of Noah. Back then, before the flood, the people went on eating and drinking, taking wives and becoming wives, right up until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not know what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. It'll be just like that when the Son of Man comes. With those words, Yeshua was comparing the world of his age with the Epicurean lifestyle that Shaul was encountering in Athens. So we see the whole thing was being brought to a climax before 70 CE, which was the end of the scriptural writing period. So next Shabbat, God willing, we will consider the rest of Shaul's second journey as he leaves Athens and heads towards Corinth, where he will once again meet up with Sila and Timothy. So as always, until then, Shabbat Shalom.